came as a bolt from the blue, I think, so far as we were concerned.
Well, we expected war to be declared, and as Big Ben struck him, the crowds there, and everybody cheered because we were at war.
It was a lovely August morning. I can remember it, I can see it as plain as now. There's a newsagent's shop, and outside was a big placard, war declared on Germany.
We sang Rule Britannia and Britons never shall be slaves, and then marched back to Buckingham Palace, and we said we'd join the army the next day, full of enthusiasm, not drink, just enthusiasm.
Everybody was excited. Any time they saw a soldier, he was right at the top of the tree, cheering and all that. Everybody was stood in groups talking. We've got to beat the Germans, and they're already setting off to enlist quite a number that day as it broke out.
The King came out and the Queen, then we cheered and sang some more, and that was August the 4th. And I went back the next day. I thought, Christ, I'm going to join the army. I've got to give 2 weeks' notice in.
What made you so happy that war was declared?
Because I was young and stupid, I suppose. Full of patriotism and boy's own paper, that's on which my boyhood was based.
So you had a genuine enthusiasm at the time?
Oh God, yes, yes. Couldn't get in the army quick enough. It was a bit of an adventure. I was a bloody hero because I'm going to join the army. I liked it rather, it was something new, it was another part. I enjoyed it. Besides, I hadn't seen very much of the world, only as a little two-bit actor.
Got my bike out, said to Mother, I said, oh, I'm going for a ride this morning, Mum. I went for a ride and I went to the Warwick depot and enlisted at the Warwick depot. They wanted me to go in the Warwicks where they had a red coat. Well, every soldiers in those days had to walk out in the uniform, you see, red coat if you went anywhere or whatever your uniform was. Well, I didn't want to be a pillar box. I didn't want a red coat. I said, what's that regiment have a green jacket? Oh, he said, the King's Royal Rifle Corps. He said, 4 battalions, plenty of foreign service. I said, that's the regiment for me. I didn't know that it went fast to the others and had black belts and... but anyway, the green jacket appealed to me, so I joined it.
Did you have a medical inspection that day?
Oh yes, very severe, just stripped stark naked, and a hand down saying cough, see if we were ruptured, and I was past fit. There was a chap also stripped down there. I said, oh, I've got an awful shocking sight, I hate the sight of varicose veins. And of course he was turned down because of that, he was crying. Because he'd been turned down, probably laughing, I think, afterwards, a few years later.
And we got to the station, and we get on the train, and to find out where we're going, we've simply got to look through the carriage window and see what places we've passed, to give us an idea. So we soon got an idea that we were going towards the East Coast, passing certain places, you know, on the train. And there was old soldiers in my compartment as well as me, youngsters. And the old soldiers said it would be over by Christmas.
Roses are flowering in Piccadilly.
Then we went up the river, Seine up to Rouen. And on the way up we had it was a lovely voyage up the river. And we saw some of the French soldiers, our first view of the French soldiers. Red trousers and blue coats. Vive l'Anglais, vive l'Anglais, they were saying.
You were on the train, all on the top, and it was only going very slow. The footboards were full of soldiers hanging on, you know what I mean? It would be towards the end of August, third week in August, something like that. And we passed through some beautiful gardens, and the peaches were just blinking ready. And I thought to myself, well, I'd like a couple of those peaches. So I made my way to the front of the train, on the footboards and on the top till I got to the engine. And then I jumped off, where there was a garden there. It must have been a mother and daughter by the looks of them, probably a woman about 40 and 20 or something like that. And I pointed to the peaches, and they pointed to my cap badge. And the idea was that if I gave them my cap badge, they would give me some peaches. I let them have my cap badge for 2 peaches. And then I managed to run back and got on the footboard almost at the end of the train.
And I remember us going through, fields and fields of grapes. The Vendange and all the men were mobilised. It hadn't been taken. And I'd never seen fields of grapes before like this. I remember that. The streets were lined by the French crowd, and they were wild with excitement. Vive l'Angleterre, vive les Anglais. They were absolutely wild. We marched past that and marched to a field, a large field, which had been prepared because there were tents, and it was where we were going to encamp for the night. This field and the area was the actual site where Napoleon's army encamped in preparation for the intended invasion of England. But you could just discern in the distance the English coastline.
The whole town had turned out, about 3,000 persons, I should think, to see this extraordinary sight, a Scottish regiment arriving in their midst. And there was the mayor in his robes, and the little girl with a bunch of flowers, the colonel, and a dress in French, which I'm afraid my French was rather halting, and I didn't altogether get, but the gist of it was how delighted they were to welcome the British to their soil and how we'd fight together and be brothers in the war and so forth. And so to bed.
From Maubeuge, where the Flying Corps had landed, we were told to go to the given area east. We were told we should see advancing German troops. And so we were very, very excited, and we looked for them. And, of course, in those days, you were very limited in your facilities. You had a map strapped on one end, and you had a piece of paper, a pad with a pencil on the other, and it was rather wobbly about. And you couldn't do very much careful, but you had your map, and you looked. Well, as soon as we got over our area, instead of seeing a few odd German troops, I saw the whole area covered with field grey advancing humans. Machines, transport, guns, infantry, cavalry, and we were completely, my pilot and I, we were completely astounded, because it was not a little more than we'd been looking for, it was infinitely more. In fact, it looked as though the place was alive with the Germans.
And on the morning of the 21st, we started to march up to Mons, scorching hot, and the marching was terrible. The route national, straight as a die, you could see for miles in front of you. The road seemed endless. Better try and marching.
And we came roaring back, and we landed. Whereupon I was put into a motor car by my squadron commander and taken off to GHQ, which was in the chateau some miles away. And as we arrived, we were ushered in, and we went into a room with a lot of elderly gentlemen covered in gold lace and all the rest of it, all these senior generals. It was Sir John French's own personal conference going on.
And we had no information about the enemy at all. So far as we knew, it's a peace march. And come the morning, we set off, and we found two other battalions had arrived, the Welsh Fusiliers, the Middlesex, and we were now the 19th Brigade. It's completely ad hoc headquarters. And when we got to the area that we were going to billet, we were told, oh, no, you're not going to billet there. You're going to go up to the canal, and you'll take up an outpost position on the canal.
I belonged to D Company of the 4th Middlesex Regiment. We took up position on a station called Oberg, 6 kilometres ahead of Mons. We took up position there about 4 in the afternoon, and my platoon, 13, happened to be on the roof. We fraternised with the people during the evenings and were anxiously awaiting the arrival of the Germans. But little did we know what was coming.
We had reached a village about 3 miles from Mons in our advance towards the German armies, and we were enjoying the hospitality of the villagers when, quite out of the blue, came the order, prepare for action, get mounted.
And somebody announced us, and he said, oh, here's a boy from the Flying Corps, come here and sit down. So I was put to sit next to him rather terrifiedly, and I showed him a map all marked out. He said, have you been over that area? And I said, yes, sir. And I explained what I'd seen, and they were enormously interested, and then they began reading the figures that I'd estimated, whereupon I seemed to feel that their interest faded. They seemed to look at each other and shrug their shoulders, and then French turned round to me and said, now, yes, my boy, this is terribly interesting, but tell me all about an airplane. Are they very cold? Can you see anything? What do you do if your engine stops, and all that sort of stuff? And I couldn't bring him back to earth, because obviously He wasn't interested. He looked at me and he said, yes, this is very interesting what you've got, but you know, our information, which of course is correct, proves that I don't think you could really have seen as much as you think. Well, of course, I quite understand, you may imagine you have, but it's not the case.
We rode out of the village about a couple of miles. We came into action on the high ground overlooking Mons.
And eventually we became on the scene of the conflict, and from the distance you could see the shells bursting and the guns firing and so on.
We immediately engaged the German artillery, and that developed into a regular artillery duel.
They came upon us like rows of houses, and I can quite believe with some of the things I read in a book about us meeting the most formidable war machine that man has ever produced.
We suddenly saw these people coming, didn't realise who they were at first, and we said, by crikey, it's bloody Germans.
They seemed to be forming an enveloping movement over the Mons Canal.
I heard the first shell burst above my head. It was a shrapnel shell, and the bullets came down like whistling like all the hobs of hell, as if 1,000 whistles had been turned on, you know. And the bullets, of course, were round, but they had a little tick on them that made them whistle as they came through the air. That was my first shell.
We started gunfire immediately. We fired in open sights, fused north. They got about 200 yards from the guns and galloped away to the left and rode right into a squadron of our own cavalry who dealt with them then.
They came down like...
We were soon depleted in numbers. Artillery brought up to bear on the station, and we were told to retire one at a time, as we had to get down a ladder. By that time, the platoon was reduced to a few men. Our company officer and second in command was out of action, and the company to which I must give the greatest praise. We retired fighting small rearguard actions, and that, in all probability, was the commencement of the long retreat from Mons, and the many rearguard actions were fought over that 12 days.
Sitting on my top of my Maltese cart, I could see in the distance one of the sights that one could seldom see. I saw Germans and British cavalry fighting with swords, cut and thrust, and I thought, what an extraordinary thing. But there they were, cutting and thrusting about 3/4 of a mile away.
I had an interesting and rather difficult reconnaissance to do, in course of which I got rather badly shot up, but fortunately without any fatal results, and managed to get back with a report which, amongst others, indicated the very serious nature in which the British Expeditionary Force found itself. We were really outnumbered and outflanked, and we had to get out quite quickly. I know the troops were very upset having to withdraw because they thought they'd beaten the Germans in front of them. What they didn't know was that coming around the corner was an outflanking party that was going to make a lot of trouble for them if they didn't get out.
We hadn't been in action very long before the order came to move, which we did. We moved back again. And on our journey back, we went through a grove of trees which was being heavily shelled. And after continuing taking up positions like this, one after another, night fell.
About midnight, we heard a certain amount of shooting on our right, and people were alerted. And at 2 o'clock, the commanding officer got orders that we were to get out at once and withdraw, and that furthermore there was a bend in the canal about 1.5 miles away, and that he must be round that with the whole of the battalion before daylight. Of course, it was a tedious business getting the people roused and to get them all moving down the towpath again. And it was about 5 minutes to 4 when we got round the bend, and I saw the colonel heave quite a sigh of relief.
We had to pull back a little bit. Jerry played a searchlight on us during the night, and we thought we were going to be for it, but early the next morning, retirement started.
I don't remember any of the people who have described the Battle of Mons and the retreat ever mentioning what the weather was like. I can tell you it was damn hot every day of that retreat, boiling hot.
If we had an average sleep of 2 to 3 hours in a day, it's as much as we got. And that was only when we had a chance of getting to a cornfield, lying down, because we never knew when we moved on again. We might lay 5 minutes, move.
But you had to just, beat it off, because the Germans followed up very fast.
Well, after advancing several days into Belgium and passing these refugees, many of them with a little dog carts and piled with the pitiful possessions, prams, children, one thing and another. We found ourselves eventually going the same way as the refugees. So therefore we knew very well we were no longer advancing into Belgium.
In some parts it was almost chaos, and we had staff officers standing at crossroads directing the traffic. What regiment are you? What regiment are you over there, that way?
And of course our road got more congested with refugees, and we got mixed up with the infantry, who in turn were getting more and more tired. They were carrying somewhere in the region of 100 pound on the back, the infantry, which we did not have. And so therefore their feet got worse and worse.
In this blazing hot sun, their feet had swollen inside their boots. They just couldn't bear to hobble along.
A lot of it was due to the fact that a number of them were reservists and had been called up just prior to the outbreak of war. And of course the first thing that happened to them, they were fitted out with kit, including boots, and they were very heavy. Well, before the war we were able to break them in, but they didn't get time. And if they got those boots off, they couldn't get them back on again.
What they did was they took their boots off, cut them off in places, tied the laces together, hung them round their necks, and then round their feet, the socks, they took off their puttees and wound their puttees round their feet and continued on the retreat that way. I think they were made of marvellous stuff to do that, because you imagine the hard roads, there were no soft roads in France, but they still kept their rifles and they kept their ammunition. So they were soldiers.
We were carrying on the retirement in the morning, and during that day we saw our first French troops, and I was surprised to see them. The cavalry were in action there with the cuirasses on, plumed helmets, the infantry with the red trousers, blue jacket.
You'd think we were back in the Napoleonic days, with the helmet and the horse's tail, breastplates, red uniforms and blue uniforms, like our hussars and things that we had. They went to battle in that.
No camouflage, no nothing. It absolutely showed up, you see, in the old way of square formation.
Of course, our clothes then were very funny. A blue jacket, a small cap, and our red trousers. It was really the best thing to be killed very promptly.
Over the crest, about, I suppose, 15,000 yards away, we saw something moving, and we put our barn stroud onto it. That's the rangefinder. And we saw that it was three enormous columns of Germans moving across this open country in mass formation.
All I do know is I had sore feet. We kept on moving 3 or 4 days. We marched from here to there. What the object of the exercise was, I can't tell you now.
We were told we were to make for Locato, and that the 5th Division was holding an extended position, and we would get a night's rest, which sounded very good, because we'd been very short of sleep really the last few nights. 10 o'clock at night, we got into Locato Goods Station, the whole battalion. Very lumpy cobbles on which we were required to lie down. One really couldn't sleep on them. They were too much. And people really walked about most of that night. You couldn't get much rest.
At 1 in the morning, my battalion went into a factory in the village of Likatu, and at 4 o'clock in the morning we moved out hurriedly because the German Uhlan was at the other end of the village. And we moved out, and then we took up a position to do a rearguard action for the expeditionary force.
Just before daylight, we got breakfast, and I remember I got a very good breakfast that morning. It was fried bacon with the bread fried in the bacon juice, and most welcome, and some very sweet tea. At 6, we were told to move back through Locato and continue the withdrawal. And just then, we heard a lot of shooting in the town behind us. And the word went round that the Uhlans were in the town.
Well, we were just lined up in a cornfield with one company on the right, one company on the left. Middlesex and other people all mixed up in this, and this famous L battery behind us, the one that got blasted to pieces. And to me, I shall never see a picture like this in my life again. These Germans literally came in their hordes, and were just shot down, but they still kept coming. There was sufficient of them to shove us out of the field eventually.
We were off our maps, we didn't know where we were. In the distance we could see people moving about. Whether they were German cavalry or our own cavalry, it was hard to say. The light was very bad by then.
Then the realization what war meant when you've seen my company sergeant major, for instance, a fellow called Sim, he was wounded in the mouth. He was going back dripping blood, and various people getting killed and wounded.
Intense rifle fire broke out from the Welsh Fusiliers who were on our right. And an officer near me, Captain Rose, was looking through his glasses and blew his whistle and said, "Stop, it's our own people." And the firing stopped like that.
We were easily able to see where the fighting was, because village after village began to burn. The desperate fighting was going on round Lecato. There were no trenches. The infantry was constantly on the move, digging themselves in where they could. Dispatch riders were galloping about. We could see guns being limbered up and drawn back, others in front firing at point-blank range, and little islands of troops surrounded by the enemy still fighting on.
What I shall never understand is what I was supposed to do with a bugle in the front line, except to blow if my platoon officer told me to blow. What would be asked to blow, I wouldn't honestly know now. I couldn't blow ceasefire because it didn't mean a thing.
Down the roads leading south was a continuous stream of transport. Refugees, guns, infantry and cavalry all mixed up together.
One night I stayed awake all night. The sound, the noises. You could hear the noises of battle, you see, in the distance. But I felt very tired the next day. It was a very wearing experience, you know.
We finally got to St Quentin. There we had a halt in the main square, and everybody was dead beat. They were just falling down and absolutely tired out.
Oh, whack to the world. Whack to the world. We laid down, I slept for about 18 hours, I think, must have done.
Well, as long as you were going forward and pushing the German, you could go forever. To go the other way, you were depressed forever. I mean, that was my feeling. Your whole morale was down in your boots. But directly you went forward and were going forward, you talk about something lifting you up to the heavens. That was the difference between advance and retreat.